Welcome to Get Wed,
a podcast to plan your wedding by.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Kerry.
And we're both here as professional photographers
and brides-to-be to help you plan your big day.
Each week we'll discuss a topic that you'll encounter along your wedding planning journey.
And with the help of fellow industry experts, we'll navigate this crazy wedding world
together.
Okay, welcome back to Get Wed, everybody. You may have noticed that I'm solo today, as Katie's little boy has had his jabs this week, and so he's a little bit poorly today. But luckily, it's not just going to be me yabbing on. I've got a guest to chat with this week, and so I'm joined by Dan Hinz. I hope I said your surname right.
Yep, that's perfect.
Perfect. He's joined us today to talk all about money, finances, and budgeting, which is definitely something I've always needed help with, even after I've planned my wedding. So welcome to the podcast, Dan. Would you like to let our listeners know a little bit more about what it is that you do?
Well, thank you for having me, Kerry. Yeah. So I am a financial coach, and I help newlyweds and engaged couples stop money fights before they happen by helping you get on the same page and start budgeting. And so, I used to do investments and insurance. I was with a financial firm, and I had all the licenses and exams taken. But I found it wasn't quite as satisfying of a career that I wanted. So helping couples and individuals and families just kind of get on the right path. And so that when they have money to invest, you can go to a financial advisor and ask them all those questions. But yeah, I can get you started on the right path right away.
Perfect. I think everyone needs that help.
Yeah.
So could you share a little bit of advice for couples who are looking to start planning for their wedding? So perhaps they're right at the start of the journey.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So when you're at the very start of the journey, and I think if you've listened to Kerry and Katie long enough here on the podcast, is that, you want to start with a budget. You want to start trying to figure out what it is that you value the most. Mm-hmm. Which do you guys care about the most? Do you want an open bar? How do you feel about the venue? For me and my wife, my wife and her mother were basically in charge of everything. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, her family doesn't drink and mine does. and so I said, okay, there's only one thing I need to be in charge of, and that's the bar. Everything else, you can put me in a pink suit if you want, because at the end of the day, we'll be married, but at least there'll be an open bar. And she said, okay. And so, you want to have those conversations just to talk about what it is that you like, what you don't like, how you're feeling, what your goals are, because, as I like to say, it's called personal finance for a reason. You don't start with the finance, you start with the personal. So mm-hmm. Sit down, have those conversations first, and then you can start talking about joint bank accounts and budgeting and what apps you want to use and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think the hardest part of planning a wedding is the fact that you don't really know how much of a budget you need until you start planning a wedding, because you've got nothing to compare it to. It's quite scary to be like, well, we'll put this much money on it, and then get, just booking your venue sometimes eats the whole budget that you thought you needed. So it's a scary process.
Yeah, it's definitely scary for a wedding. But when I start working with couples and in budgeting, what I tell them also is that it's a skill you can use forever. Mm-hmm. So, the first month it does kind of suck, I'll be honest, because you're really starting from scratch. But once you get the first budget done and you live your life for a month and you get the second one done, and you're really just tweaking at that point. Mm-hmm. And then you get the third one, you tweak a little bit more. And really after 3 or 4 months, you've got it down pat. And so I'm sure it's the same for wedding budgeting. Is the first one is just, it's not going to be fun because you're so lost. But as you learn more and you add to it and you tweak things from time to time, it gets better.
Yeah, definitely. So would you recommend couples to borrow money to be able to afford their wedding day?
In general, I would say no. Mm-hmm. But in the end, you guys are adults and you've got to make the decision for yourself. When it comes to going into debt for something, if you get a car loan, well, at least you have a car to help get you to work. If you have a student loan, you hopefully have a degree that you can then get a higher paying job. And so when it comes to borrowing money to just spend it on the wedding, certainly you'll be married, which is wonderful. You're off to a great start with your relationship, but otherwise it's just a giant party. Mm. However, you're adults, and if you want to have a great party and you want those memories forever, then there's some value to that. So when I start to talk to couples, the one thing I don't like to do, I don't like to tell them how to live their life. Rather than trying to tell them what to do, just try to help them create a system where they can make decisions together. So, for example, let's say you're going to go get a loan. It's $10,000 and $10,000, and then maybe it's the minimum payment is $300 a month. So then you can say, okay, so if we don't want to get into trouble, and we want this wedding and we want this loan and it's going to cost $300 a month. What is it in our daily lives that we can say no to so we can say yes to this loan? And eventually, depending on what that payment is and how much it's going to cost, it might get really, really hard to say no, or it might get really, really easy to say yes. And so once you have that number and you kind of start to look at your life to say, oh yeah, no, we can afford this, or maybe it's like, no, we need to back this up a little bit.
Yeah, because there's nothing worse than getting after the wedding day and that kind of excitement then all dies down and you're back to normal life and then you're just left with a mountain of debt. That's just got to be the worst thing ever.
There can be some buyer's remorse there.
Yeah, definitely. So I think about to the budgeting and stuff with things like that. I found that when we were planning our day, a lot of the money we were kind of paying deposits and things straight away. And so you're thinking, oh, okay, we've got to pay all this money, but you don't have to pay it till like the month before the wedding. So you've kind of got a long time to save, and then suddenly all the savings that you managed to make just drain out of your account that month before, and it's just really disheartening.
Yeah, and it can feel bad. And when I in my ultimate guide that I wrote, what I find with everyone is that when you start to save up and you have those goals and you decide together, like, yes, this money is for that, then it kind of gets out of your mind to say you've already agreed 50-50 like that this money is going over here and we can't touch it. And so it feels bad for that money to drain out, but you decided ahead of time that was the plan the whole time. Yeah,
it's like you say, budgeting for things that are important to you, isn't it? Okay, so do you have any clever ideas on saving on the everyday things that we tend to spend money on without noticing that you could then maybe use to fund towards your wedding day?
That's a really good question. So when it comes to the personal finance world, I know there's a million blogs and probably a billion blog posts that talk about how you can, cut your cable or negotiate lower rates on your rent and other things of that nature, which are all good to go. But, as I talk about in my ultimate guide and when I help my couples, I really want to try to find the balance in your life to say, how much fun can you have while still being responsible? And so, when it comes to the little things you can do every day, really for me, the first thing to do is to have that number, kind of like the debt before, or if you're trying to save up $12,000 in a year, and it's a year away, that's $1,000 a month. So then you can sit and say, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to cut back on just for now so that we can save up and pay for the wedding? Because certainly myself, I love Oreos. They're my favorite cookie in the world. But if I'm going to lose weight, then I'll say no to Oreos. But if I'm not trying to lose weight and it's just a random day, then why say no? So before you get started cutting back on stuff, have that goal, have that finish line that you guys are running towards together as a team, as a family. Then go ahead and start looking into the little things you can cut back on. And to be quite honest, it's almost always food. It's here in the States, Starbucks gets it. I know Costa Coffee is huge in the UK. And so a lot of times it's those little habits, that $3 a day, $5 a day, £5 that add up over the course of a month. I think some people, if you're a smoker, that's something that can add up, especially over time. So it's things to figure out, okay, what do I want to say no to so I can say yes to this wedding? And so once you start to find those things to say, okay, I'm just going to say no now, but once the wedding's over, we can go back.
Yeah, and it's really surprising how quickly those little things can add up, isn't it? Like you say, a £5 sandwich or a coffee here and there doesn't sound like it's going to affect a wedding budget at all. But once you think how often you're spending that throughout the week, it soon adds up.
Yeah. Exactly. And if you as a couple aren't tracking your money, and you don't necessarily have to budget. And when I say budget, I mean kind of planning ahead. But there's also tracking. So if you can just somehow watch where the money's coming in and where it's going out, and just watch. You don't have to plan ahead per se. But once you start to see those numbers add up, then you can see really the consequences of your actions. It's for myself, I weigh myself on a scale every day, and I'm a nerd like that. I've got an Excel sheet and I put it in every day. And so I can see how my actions the day before immediately affect my weight the next day, and it helps me figure out what I did well and what I didn't do well. And the same can be said of money, is to if you just track it and keep an eye on it, automatically it'll start changing your behavior because you're keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same as like people who make food diaries, where you purposely don't
Yes.
write in the things that are bad for you because you don't want to admit to the fact you've done it.
Yep. And that's the struggle is that, if you're hiding things from yourself, that doesn't help much either. And I do it all the time. So we're all human. It happens. Be kind to yourself, give yourself a little grace and just say, okay, well, I'm human. I made a mistake. How can I do better next time?
Yeah.
And, smile and laugh about it a little bit. You'll be all right.
Yeah, it's quite scary, the idea of writing down every penny you spend, but I'm sure that's the best way to find those habits that you can easily break. And as soon as you feel yourself thinking, oh, I'm going to go and buy something today that you don't need, if you're tracking your cost, you'll kind of stop yourself from doing it, knowing you've got to write it down, won't you? So.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I found that, especially if you sit here and think, well, what can I do to cut back? For me, it's like looking at a blank page when I'm trying to write something. It is really scary, but once you get started and once you start trying stuff or say, fiddling around, eventually you find some stuff that ends up working. And I've found, especially when it comes to even with money and budgeting, is that being creative and having creative solutions comes from some restriction. The Mona Lisa is actually on a very small canvas. I mean, it's a masterpiece. Everyone, raves about it. But if you've ever seen it in person, it's actually it's going to be smaller than you think.
Yeah.
And so, but, when it comes to artists, once you have that size of canvas, it's to say, okay, what can I paint on here? Because if I want to try to paint something detailed, I don't have enough room. Same goes with budgeting, is that once you start to look to see where everything is, then you can go, oh, okay, well, here's maybe the first thing that I should try.
Yeah. And something that's just come to me quickly is there any like clever tricks that can stop you from spending so much money? Because I can imagine if I was to take out a big chunk of cash and I could see myself physically spending the money, is that a good way to stop yourself from, rather than just tapping your card everywhere?
Definitely. Pain is a really good way to stop doing things. So if you want to switch from like a credit card or a debit card to cash, that will definitely help, because then you've got to see your friends coming out of your wallet or out of your purse and being spent, and you don't want them to go away. But another way is if you haven't heard of or used, what's stick.com. So it's stick with 2 Ks. And what it is you sign up your credit card and you set a goal, and you have someone as a referee. It could be your partner, it could be a friend. And you publicly say, hey, I'm going to meet this goal. And if your referee says, no, they didn't meet their goal, whether it's a weight goal or a money goal, or you're just trying to finish a book or whatever it is, they click a button and it charges your credit card.
Oh, what?
And so you lose money, and it can get posted on Facebook. I know I have a friend that she uses IFT, so if this, then that, if she doesn't log out of her computer at a certain time, or if she doesn't wake up at a certain time, it automatically posts to Facebook something embarrassing. So she has an embarrassing picture like set up, ready to go, and she has to turn off that alarm every day, or it gets posted to Facebook. So it's the embarrassment, or the idea of the future embarrassment has got her to get up early in the morning and start working or start working out. So pain, when you're starting a habit, it helps. But eventually the habit becomes ingrained, and then it becomes automatically rewarding. So eventually you switch over to the rewarding side of things, but it takes some time. Yeah.
I've never heard of that idea before, and that's a really clever, a really good way to kind of make sure you're doing the things you want to stay on track for.
Oh, yeah. So, if you're having trouble using rewards to start a habit, try to use pain. It works pretty well, I'll be honest.
And whilst you're on the subject of apps as well, is there any good apps for keeping an idea on your budget and your money?
Oh, sure. So my favorite is mint.com, and I like it because it's free to sign up for. Now, I know, and I'm talking really for the United States, is that it works well for us. Now, when it comes to the UK and other countries, I'm not sure how well Mint, if it plays well with other banks, because what it does is anytime you spend money, there's a transaction in your bank account, and Mint just pulls that data and keeps everything into one place. And so if you and your partner want to start budgeting together, you can use an app to put everything in one place, but you don't actually have to combine your bank accounts because the software doesn't care where your bank accounts are or who owns them, if they're separate or joint or whatever. So if Mint isn't an option, I also know there's a website called youneedabudget.com. A lot of people call it YNAB. And that you can use, I believe, without connecting bank accounts. You can do it both ways, but it's not free. I think it's, last I looked, it was like $60 a year. So it's a little bit more expensive, but at least it gets you started. Yeah. And that's a really good software to use without connecting to bank accounts. Other good apps that I know of are EveryDollar and Envelopes. So it's like the word envelopes, but with an M as in Mary in front of it, Envelopes, and then Good Budget as well. So those are kind of my top 5 that I usually recommend.
I'm sure there'll be some UK equivalents, or they'll probably be able to use them with UK banks as well, I'd imagine. So yeah, it's quite interesting. I feel like in this day and age where everyone's like tracking everything, like through their Fitbits and their phones and stuff, sometimes tracking money is probably a good idea as well.
Oh yeah, and I mean with cryptocurrencies and everything else in the world is the world is leaning more towards the electronic ways, especially using Venmo to pay friends back. So if you can find an electronic system that helps you track stuff, definitely you're safeguarding yourself for the future.
Yeah, perfect. And you kind of touched on the idea there about how couples maybe are starting to think about combining their incomes as well. So for those that aren't combining their income. So for take an example, my husband and I, we don't combine ours, but we have a joint credit card, and then monthly we pay off that credit card together. So we don't have a credit card debt as such, it comes out automatically from our accounts. But we don't share we still have our own money, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So what would you advise?
Yeah, go ahead.
Or how would you tell people to set these things up?
Sure, that's a good question. So there's 2 major things. One is talking about joint bank accounts, but also having separate money. So as I said before, when it comes to personal finance, don't start with the finance, start with the personal. From what I've found and the people that I've coached, how you have your account set up, what apps you use, what credit cards you use, they don't mean anything if you're not talking about money. If you're not sitting down and having a plan just on paper or in a spreadsheet, just something that you can both put your stamp of approval on to say, you know what, as a family, these are our goals, and this is how we're going to spend our money to get our goals, and how we're going to have fun. So when it comes to having joint accounts or separate accounts, to be honest, it's just logistics. It really doesn't matter if you don't. If you aren't budgeting, then the joint stuff doesn't matter as much. So focus on having those conversations first. But after that, my wife and I, we started budgeting and handling money together with completely separate accounts. And after about 2 or 3 years, we moved and bought a house, and there's a bank right around the corner. So we said, well, let's move everything to that bank. We like the people there. And that's, when we moved the money, we made all joint accounts. So we've been happy using money and budgeting both ways. And I've gone on Reddit and read hundreds of comments, and you can have very long and happy marriages both ways, where everything is separate or everything is joint or somewhere in between, like you said, with like a joint credit card. So having those meetings is important first. But as you mentioned, you guys have your own money. And that's one of the biggest tips that I want to get across to everybody listening, is that it's okay to have some fun money for each of you. Some money where you don't need to ask for permission. If your friends ask you out for dinner, you just go to dinner. If you want to buy something on Amazon, just go buy it on Amazon. Have some fun money every month where not everything is a joint decision. That's okay. And you might be thinking, well, how much should we have? It really depends on your goals. Like I said before with the debt, have as much fun as possible without ruining your bigger goals. So my wife and I, we started $50 a month for each of us. We're pretty low key. We don't have expensive habits. We just sit at home and read books and watch Netflix. And so with that, eventually hers went up to 75 and mine was 50. And now we're both at 75, and we're thinking about maybe both going up to 100 a month. But everything else in our budget is taken care of. We have a date night fund and everything else. So it's awesome, and it's good to have some money for each of you that is basically permission free. It's your money to just do whatever you want for the month. As long as you don't go over the budget, then who cares?
Yeah, that's a good idea as well, because I can imagine if you had a joint bank account, buying each other birthday and Christmas presents gets quite tricky when you can see the statements.
Yeah, on that note, the good news is if you buy gifts, if you want to surprise your partner with gifts, if you buy it from Amazon, it just says Amazon and a dollar amount, and
That's
they
true.
probably don't know if it was for you or for them. Now, if you're gonna buy something, from K Jewelers, or if it says jewelry store on it, yeah, it's a little harder to hide it. But I've got tips and tricks, ways where you can still, if you want to completely surprise your partner with a gift, there are still ways to do it, even if both of you can see everything.
Yeah. Interesting. And when you were talking about your budget, then it sounds like you are very organized, like you've got little pockets of money for everything. Is that how you'd suggest start like figuring out your budget then, having parts of money for different points of your life?
Yes, in general, yes. And so with that, I know for my wife and I, we've gotten used to it. And so our budget has kind of gotten complicated over time. But for anyone listening, the budget that you want to create needs to be tailored towards you. And like I said, the first one is not very fun because you're building it from scratch. But the second one is way easier because you're just tweaking it and editing it as you go. So, for example, when we first started budgeting, because I'm a nerd about this stuff, I had a budget for everything. There was like a bathroom supply budget, and a house cleaning supply budget, and a makeup budget, and a toiletries budget, and all of this stuff. And it just got to the point where our budget meetings to try to figure out how much to put in each of those categories was just terrible. It was way too much work for the payoff. Like these categories aren't problems. Why do we have them? And so we decided to just combine them. So we've decided that if we buy it for the bathroom or we use it to clean anything in the house, it's in like a toiletries cleaning budget. Mm-hmm. So that's where our laundry detergent goes, and the bleach and makeup and toilet paper and paper towels, and everything else. And so we just have one number for that every month, and it made our lives a lot simpler. So when you're asking, should you have little pockets for everything, you should have enough pockets to make sure you're on track with your goals, and that's as much as you need. So make it just as complicated as possible to make sure you're on track and not digging yourself into a hole. But you don't need an accounting degree to start budget.
Yeah, it just sounded very organized. I feel a bit jealous. Like I want to make myself a little Excel spreadsheet and figure out where everything's going.
Oh yeah. Well, and on that note, I know people have asked me before, like, who does what when you start to budget. Mm-hmm. And I have found that as far as the work goes, using the apps and organizing things, one of you might just be better at that. And it really only takes one person to click buttons. So I'm absolutely fine with the work being 90-10 as long as the decisions are 50-50. Yeah. So, having those conversations and putting your stamp of approval on the plan, and then one of you goes off and just clicks the buttons that you need to do to keep things tracking.
I think there's definitely strengths in relationships like that, isn't there? My husband is definitely the money man in our relationship, and I'm always a bit scared to spend money, where he's a bit more willing to take risks, and he just understands it better than I do. So I think having two minds together is a good thing.
Well, yeah, in my, there was one day where my wife came home with, we've got Target stores, and she came home with a bunch of bags, and this was a terrible thought, and I'm apologizing ahead of time, but as soon as she walked in the door, I'm like, what the hell did she buy this time? And then I stopped, and I realized, why did I think that? That's not okay. We're newlyweds. I shouldn't be thinking that. How do I not think of that ever again? And so that's how we really got onto the track of budgeting. And so when you say that you're scared to spend money, if you sit down and have that conversation and you understand, like, oh, I get to spend whatever I want up to, 100 pounds. And as long as it's under that, who cares? And, a lot of that scared and a lot of that guilt goes away, because that spending is actually part of the plan. Already, both of you, that, the mortgage is going to get paid or the bills are going to get paid, and you can have some fun. And it helps to reduce that anxiety or any guilt you might be feeling as well.
Definitely. So also wanted to make a little point about wedding insurance.
Yes.
So when, I don't know if you have it over in the US, but over here there's an assurance that you can purchase, so that all the kind of costs that you're making towards your wedding, so your venue, caterers, dress, you can pay a certain amount of insurance every month, so that if anything goes wrong with any of those things, you're covered with insurance. So, for example, if your venue went into administration and suddenly you had nowhere to have your wedding, your insurance will be able to pick that up for you and help you out. So do you think it's a cost worth investing in?
That's a really good question. I think wedding insurance was essentially invented after my wife and I got married, or at least she never brought it up to me. So
Yeah.
maybe we bought it and I just never knew about it. But when it comes to insurance in general, you really want to think about, what's the worst that can happen? If you went your entire life and were never in a car accident and you paid monthly insurance premiums throughout your life, you might think that's a waste of money. But, my wife a couple of years ago was in a car accident where she was hit from behind and it sent her into the car in front of her, totaled her vehicle. Okay. Fortunately, no one went to the hospital. No one got sued or no one sued anyone else. But, having that insurance in that moment was fantastic. We were ridiculously happy to have that insurance because it got us a new car and we didn't have to pay so much out of pocket in one time. So when it comes to wedding insurance, it's where you need to make that call is, go ahead and go look into it, figure out how much it costs, and figure out, how much is that monthly amount from now until the wedding, and try to figure out, well, if it's, $100 a month from now until the wedding, can we make that work? Can we say no to some other things so we can say yes to this wedding insurance? But I think insurance in general, you also need to think about, especially, and I'm kind of going off the top of my head. I'm not an expert in wedding insurance, but I would assume if you're in a big city and just all the venues get booked like a year or two in advance, and you're trying to reschedule stuff, then definitely it sounds like wedding insurance is going to be important. But if you're from a small town and you've got, all of your family live, a half an hour away, and you could just like pick up and just do the wedding tomorrow instead of today, then maybe wedding insurance isn't as much of a problem because you're more flexible. So it really depends on your situation as well. But when it comes to you as a couple trying to decide on an amount, we'll get the amount, figure out how much it's going to cost, and see if you can make it work.
Yeah, I suppose with any insurance, it's one of those things you're not thankful for until you need to use it, are you? So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also when it always comes to money, it's not just about price, it's about value. Because I'm sure everyone listening, there's something that they just love to spend money on. They don't mind spending money on. For me, it's sunglasses. I will easily pay $200 to $300 on a great pair of sunglasses, but I'll keep them spotless and clean for 7 years. So I try to get a lot of mileage out of them. Whereas some people, they'll buy, $10 pair of cheap sunglasses, and if they get broken, oh well, I'll just go get another one. So it comes down to what you as in a couple value, and then what's the price for that value that you're looking to get.
Which I think is key to the whole wedding spending anyway. Like you mentioned at the start of the episode, you might want to spend a huge chunk of your budget on your venue, and then perhaps you're not too bothered about having fresh flowers, for example. It's weighing up the things that you want to spend your money on and that are important to you and focusing on those areas, isn't it? Yeah.
And so it's, I caution people, don't try to get yourself into a category like I'm a spender or I'm a saver. Those categories are too restrictive because we all are savers in some respect. We're all frugal with some things, and then we're all spendy in some other things. And so it comes down to that conversation to ask yourselves, well, what do we care about? What do we value? And what's going to make us a happy day more than other things? Because, it may be as, I don't want to talk for all guys in the world, but, flowers aren't really our thing usually. So it's one of those things where, if you want fresh flowers, just figure out how much that costs and say, okay, well, how can we make this work? Because certainly a happy wife, happy life is what I've learned.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for all of your advice there. You mentioned that you have something to give away to our couples to help them get on their budgeting. Yes,
so I have a free guide, and it's 20,000 words long, and it's how to talk to your spouse about money. And it's also, if you download the guide, you also get a special gift. Because those of you listening, you might download the guide and read it and love it, but then you're thinking, okay, how do I get my partner on board? Well, that's the extra free gift you also get. Is figure out, okay, how do we have the next conversation? So if you want that free gift, you can go to my website. I've got a special link, and it's adultingwithmoney.com/getwed.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. That sounds really interesting, actually. I'm going to go download it for myself.
Yes, please.
Perfect. And we'll put all the links that you mentioned today in our show notes so that our listeners can go along and find them there. And hopefully, everyone, that you're all a little bit clear about how to start saving some money for your wedding or start getting budgeting for your general day-to-day lives. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dan.
Well, thank you for having me, Kerry. Sorry I missed Katie, so I hope her and her son are doing well. And I hope you guys have a great weekend.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Get Wed. Don't forget you can always subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, and while you're there you may as well leave us a review. You can join us for more wedding chat in our Facebook group if you just can't wait until next week. You'll find all the links that you need via our website, including show notes for this episode, over at getwedpodcast.co.uk. We'll see you next time. Happy planning!